Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We're back in the second of our two-part series with John Leckie. Yes, John Leckie, arguably one of the greatest producers of all time, definitely one of my favourites. In this episode, John is going to talk about working with Syd Barrett as a tape op and just some great stories. Also working with Pink Floyd on Meddle at only 21 years old. He's also going to talk about the Dukes of Stratosphear and, of course, XTC. There is some conversation on Kula Shaker, the Lars, and of course working with the great Radiohead on The Bends. John also worked with Roy Harper and a ton of other great artists. So stick around. This is an incredible interview. John is, well, he's my favourite producer. Well, him and Jack Douglas and a couple of others, George Martin, a few other great ones. But he's right up there as one of the greatest producers of all time. So check it out. Did we talk much about Syd Barrett?
I was a tape op on Barrett, the second album. I can't remember, it was 1970 or 71. I think it was 1970 actually, July, because there's a tape box on an album. There's an album called Opal, which is a compilation of Syd Barrett songs. It's called Opal, and it's a gatefold sleeve, and inside they've got a picture of a tape box, and it's like 17th of July 1970, PB, which is Peter Bown, and JL, which is me. And the song we're doing is Effervescing Elephant, and I can't spell effervescing. So, when you look at the tape box, there's me like the 2 or 3 attempts crossing out effervescent. So, yes, I don't, as I say, I don't know, never really had big conversations with him. And there was, between Roger and Dave were producing, really. I think Rick was even in there as well. And it was difficult to get a song, a complete song start to finish from him, even with possibilities of editing. But I went in, I think it was 1974, and Peter Jenner phoned me up. Peter Jenner is a producer I'd worked with Roy Harper and different people. He could Broughton band her. And he said that Syd was going back in the studio. He had some new songs, and he was going to make an album in a week. And it was just going to be him on his own, and me and Peter Jenner, because we were, I don't know, we were cool people, and he might remember me or something, because Pete came down from Cambridge with a Pink Floyd and managed Pink Floyd with Syd, through all the got the record deal and all that kind of thing. So he knew Syd quite well. Yes, and we went in for, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, and Syd would show up and mess around with the guitar. But again, it was difficult to get a complete song out of him with the singing or any kind of structure. And of course, he kept unplugging himself or turning down and wandering off, really. I mean, you'd see him from the studio. There was a window, and you could see him wandering over the crossing and up towards St John's Wood Station.
Let's talk a little bit about Meddle.
Yeah, so Meddle was started in Abbey Road, and funny enough, it was Peter Bown and myself, 1971 in January, and it was the Floyd coming in with various ideas, little snippets of ideas, and I mean, you could say loops. There probably were a few tape loops in there as well. Chord changes, little riffs that the whole band had together, kind of thing. And we called them Nothing. I think it came about because I'm sitting with the tape box and they're playing, and everyone goes, "Yeah, that's a good take." And I say, "What's this one called?" And someone said, "Oh, call it Nothing." So I wrote Nothing, and I think they got up to Nothing number 27 or something. So every little piece was called Nothing. The band went away and rehearsed and arranged all these pieces of Nothing, and came up with the Return of the Son of Nothing, which was, I guess it was 30 minutes, 25-minute piece, start to finish, which became Echoes, which I think is side 2 of Meddle. So that's with the piano through the Leslie, that single note, that bing, 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 and the beautiful chords and the and all that kind of thing in echoes, which was fantastic.
I remember it very well. I remember the first time I ever heard that. That was pretty powerful, yeah.
So that was that. Well, actually, it was 8-track at Abbey Road at the time, 1971. I don't know what date Abbey Road went 16-track, but in February 1971, we were still 8-track. And so the Floyd booked RAK Studios, Oxford Circus, and I went there with Peter Bown and transferred the 8-track to the 16 and filled up the other 8 tracks. And luckily for me, anyway, my big jump there was that Peter Bown got kind of, well, he looked at the Neve mixer and the 16-track and said, "I'll blow this, I'm going back to Abbey Road, you carry on," and just left it to me, So it was
amazing.
Almost my first engineering thing was the Floyd doing all the overdubs on echoes, and one of these days cut you into little pieces, different, which was a lot longer. That's a big edit on that. One of these days was going to be there was potential for a 20-minute number, but it never survived.
21 years old, engineering Meddle for Pink Floyd. That's one heck of a credit.
I think Jeff Emerick was 21 when he did Sgt. Pepper, and Richard Lush the tape op was 19. I mean, they're in charge of the biggest group in the world for the biggest record in the world.
Yeah, I seem to remember he was like 19, turning 20 when he was doing Revolver.
That's right. And he got the job when he was 16. And on the road, he lived like me, he lived quite local. And when he was 16, his father said, "Right, son, you've got to get a job, go out and find a job." And so he literally just walked down the road and thought, "Oh, the recording studio, I'll ask for a job, see if there's any jobs going." And that's how he got the job. It's in his book, a great book. I'd really recommend that, actually. It's called Here, There and Everywhere.
Yes, it's wonderful.
And it's one of the best Beatle books ever, really, because he's there, in the front line. He'll tell you all about it, The next thing is The Lure of Salvage, which is the kind of dub record, that we did, the experimental dub thing, which was released on CD as XTC Explode. And even with Go 2, Andy wanted to do, we had Go Plus, which was a 6-track EP or 4-track EP that was originally given away with Go 2, the album, and later it was sold and did quite well. And Virgin, of course, wanted to say, go in and do dub versions, do the same, because it was selling on the kind of dance thing. Although it was totally undubby, it was totally un-Jamaican. I mean, it's embarrassing, really, what we did. I mean, basically, we were taking a 24-track tape, a finished recording of the band, whether it was Making Plans for Nigel or something off the first record, or it had a choice of anything up to Drums and Wires. And we would take a track, write out everything that was on it, and then completely change it, like disguise it. So make the snare drum into the bass drum, make the bass drum into the snare drum tonally. This is all without samples or anything, or triggers even, really. There was no triggering at all. It was all done with EQ and compression and silliness, really, and dubbing. Like your drum track would be just the tom-toms. So you gate everything, so there's no bass snare or anything else in it, just the tom fill. So every 8 bars you get this thundering tom fill that comes in out of nowhere. And then just kind of create something around that, It was very creative. It's great. It's called The Lure of Salvage. And as I say, it was all released with the Go Plus thing as XTC Explode. And it's a big favourite with ambient house DJs, because it's kind of got some beats, but it's really obscure and weird. And my friend Mixmaster Morris, every time he plays it, they all come up to go, "What is that?" What is it? It's crazy, and we'd speed things up, like purpose, see how fast the multi-track vary speed went, and mix it like that. And of course, everything. There's one called Tokyo or While Away Tokyo Day or something. And everything's going like super double fast, and it's got double delays on.
I see The Lure of Salvage comes out as Andy Partridge.
That's right. It's not an XTC record. It's an Andy Partridge. The rest of the band going, what on earth are you doing that for? You know, we don't want any part in this. So it was just me and Andy, really. Just me and Andy, and we did a song every day. We had, I don't know, 10 days or something, and every day we'd choose the tape. And, you know, I don't think there's anything backwards on there. We said our one rule was let's not do it backwards because that's easy. It's just to play it backwards, and instantly it's different, you know. So everything's just kind of, as I say, dubbed.
Here, according to Wikipedia, it says, in Japan, the record was held as a work of electronic genius and outsold all XTC albums.
There you go, you see. Dukes of Stratosphear. Really? Is that what it says? Excellent.
We didn't talk about the Dukes of Stratosphear in the first episode, so let's... we did do a typo, I might add, where which I didn't notice, where sphere was spelt... you know, of course, Phere, rather than the play on words, of course,
Sphere,
of
yes.
Shakespeare, stratosphere.
That's
yes.
right.
And it's amazing that I missed that because, of course, that's quite a obvious play on words. How does it come about? I mean, is it just something they really wanted to do, but they felt like they couldn't do it under the XTC banner because, I don't know, what was the sort of...
Oh, what happened with Dukes of Stratosphear was... kind of different. I mean, it was how many years? 5 years later, I suppose.
Yep.
5 years later. Dukes of Stratosphear came about really because Andy and Colin as well had a number of songs that weren't suitable for XTC, were a bit kind of over the top psychedelic. You can't have that, you know, you can't have that chord in it or something, or, you know, it was all a bit beyond the XTC sound. It was, what did you say, uncommercial, but it was also their dream fantasy, where Andy's in particular, and probably Dave Gregory's as well, to be in a 60s psychedelic band and, you know, rediscovering all these 60s sounds, you know, and taking things to the extreme with fuzz tones and flanges, deep stuff, wah-wah and things, which, of course, wah-wah in the 80s was banned, really. It wasn't any, it wasn't the sort of thing, you know, new wave people would never use a wah-wah, because, you know, dinosaurs played wah-wah. Well, the whole story is that there's a Canadian lady called Mary Margaret O'Hara, and Andy was scheduled to produce an album with her. And I thought they were kind of close friends, or they'd at least had, you know, some kind of rapport with each other. But no, and I found out years later, actually, Andy had never met her until they got to Rockfield and started rehearsing. And so the band came in from Canada, I think, from Toronto. Maybe from different parts of the States. I'm not quite certain. I never met the band or anyone. And set up in Rockfield, and Andy turned up with his Lynn drum machine to rehearsal. And I think immediately they looked at Andy with his drum machine and didn't like what might be coming. And Andy thought the band were just not very good and weren't capable of cutting it, and, you know, was marking down tempos and things. And slowly I wasn't there, as I say, I was doing on another job and was coming up the next week. And Andy phoned me up kind of on the Friday night and said, John, don't bother to come on Monday because we're fired. We're both fired, you know. She doesn't like my arrangements or what kind of thing. But he says, but the crunch was that she was Roman Catholic, so she went to church kind of every day and often sat in her room at Rockfield sewing or something, or very rarely came out even for food with everyone else. And the manager called Andy over and said, Andy, can you tell me one thing? What religion are you? Do you go to church, you know? And Andy says, well, no, not really. You know, I'm Church of England. And he said, and what religion is John then, who's coming up on Monday? And at this time, I was a sannyasin, a Rajneesh sannyasin. I was a follower of Osho or Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. And so in 1983, 84, I suppose, I was in their commune. You might have seen the film on Netflix. What's it called? Wild Wild Country. one of the things was that you wore red clothes. You wore a mala, around your neck, and you did meditation, and it was fantastic. And but I did wear red clothes, and Andy explained all this to this manager, not to Mary. Explained it all to the manager, and manager said, "Oh, okay." Went and talked to Mary. Came back and said, "Andy, I think it's best if you go home and tell John not to come either. We don't know." He says, "Well, what was wrong with John?" He said, "Well, we don't think Mary should be involved with someone that belongs to religion that encourages free love and free sex. If I was going to." So Andy phones me up and says not to come. And of course, we were booked for 3 months. We were booked to do the recording and then the mixing and everything else. I think it was a good 6 week. And I said, well, we've got to go to Virgin and get some compensation. They can't just cancel, Friday, and we're starting a 3-month session on the Monday. So Andy went to Virgin and kind of said, hey, those songs that you didn't really like out of the last collection? He said they sounded too 60s. Maybe we could just go in with John and do them, find a little cheap studio somewhere. And that's what we did. That's what the Dukes of Stratosphear is. It's 6 of those songs. Well, 5 of those songs, really, because Mole from the Ministry was written in the studio. And Andy kind of giving all encouragement to be as psychedelic and as 60s and crazy as possible, and of course they all delivered so well. They delivered. Andy put on his great 60s accents, and they've had all the guitar sounds. Colin was great as well with his harmonies and bass tone. And he had the song. He had probably the most psychedelic song I've ever heard, which is What in the World, which is the solo. The end part of that is just absolutely incredible, like feedback, and it's Andy on the guitar with feedback, 2 guitars, and this synth that just everything sort of disintegrates into one kind of pitch, And that whole record, I can't remember doing it really, because it was all done very quickly, and it was come on, let's mix it. If that's finished, let's do it now, And so we go straight from recording the whole band to mixing the whole band on a Trident TSM. It was done at a studio that was up for sale recently. I don't know if it's sold. It's called the Chapel Lane. It's just called Chapel Lane Studios. It's in a place called Hampton Bishop, which is near Hereford Cathedral's in Hereford. But our only trip out was to go to Hereford Cathedral, actually, because this little place is in a little village. I did a few records there, actually. I did The Fall there as well. And it was in a church, a little chapel, and the guy lived in the farm opposite, and you got the house and the chapel, and you could go crazy for however long, 2 weeks, and make as much noise as you wanted, and no one complained, no one knew you were there,
Did you do all the recordings in one go and then split it up into 2 releases, or did you come back and do the second?
Oh, I see.
Afterwards?
Yes, there's 2 albums. The first track, first one, which is 25 o'clock, is 6 tracks. An EP, really.
And then Sonic Sunspot, was that done afterwards?
Sunspot. Yeah, Sonic Sunspot was once the first EP started selling, and everyone was going crazy and saying, wow, they're selling more than XTC. Of course, Virgin said, get in and do some more, go and do some more. So we, Andy, of course, had more songs. I think he even wrote a few songs as well. But, Andy's the music pours out of him, really. We went to a studio again that I'd been to once before and remembered about, the Sawmills Studio in Cornwall, which is up a river estuary. It's up a tidal river estuary, so you can only get there when the tide is in. So once the tide goes out, the river estuary is just mud. And, and you're stuck, really. I mean, you can't even get the boat out. You have to walk over there's a railway track you walk down, or you can walk through the woods. And once you're there, it's desert island vibe, really.
Especially in the days before cell phones and the internet, you could really disappear.
Yeah. And I think that's up for sale as well. I mean, if you look at your studio property, UK Cornwall, you'll see it sitting there.
It's for sale, yeah.
And it's wonderful. You know,
It's
I don't
been
know.
for sale for about 2 years now, hasn't it? I hope the person that eventually, when they buy it, keeps it as a recording studio. I think John Leckie should buy it.
Well, it's funny because I actually went there in 1968 before it was a studio even. I mean, I went there because my wife worked up in London with as a window dresser, and one of the girls she worked with was called Demelza and came from Cornwall. And she said, "Oh, for the summer, all come down to Mum and Dad's place, the Sawmills. You know, everyone's welcome. You know." And so, for 1968 summer, we lived at the Sawmills, kind of thing. And then about 2 or 3 years later, someone said, "Hey, you know that Demelza's mum and dad's house? It's the studio." So, you know, I've got a big history with that place. It was built as a studio by someone called Tony Cox, who was a producer, did mainly film music. But Jerry Boyes, I don't know if you know Jerry, was actually an Abbey Road person before my time. He set up the Sawmills and lived there and worked there from mid 70s until we had Livingstone Studios in North London, which was really great. And Jerry Boyes does all the Buena Vista Social Club and a lot of stuff with
Oh, beautiful.
Sawmills is the place, yeah, definitely. I did loads of records there. I did Fool's Gold of the Stone Roses.
Oh, I've got to ask you because there's been so much debate. So Ian said that the sample was the Clyde Stubberfield sample. There's an interview with him saying it was Clyde Stubberfield from Funky Drummer, James Brown. But I've been getting loads and loads of people saying, no, it's actually Bobby Bird. What is... But the break in it is definitely Clive Stubberfield, just sped up. I mean, it's identical. It's got exactly the same kick drum part, bass drum part, so it sounds like the same section in the break. But it's the snare part, not the kick part, the snare part in the rest of the song that sounds like the Bobby Bird song. Do you have any memory, any recollection of it?
Only that it was a record that Ian or John came out with, and they gave it to me and said, "Put this on. This is what we want to use as a track." And it was Breakbeats. It was called Breakbeats Volume 4 or something. You know, it didn't have any name or anything. It was almost a white label, I guess. And as I say, the track on the record kind of went on for, I don't know, a minute or a minute and a half. And John didn't have any copying facilities or looping facility. You know, there's no computer or sampler. So he would put the record on, copy it to his cassette, sing the first verse and chorus, and then put it on again for the next verse and chorus because he had no way of joining it up, kind of thing. And yeah, so that it wasn't a bare naked sample in terms of just the funky drummer. Who is it? It had all this other stuff. It had tambourines and shimmer and stuff going on, which you could kind of filter out and play around with, you know. And on top of it, of course, is Rennie. Is Rennie playing snare on top? He's playing kit on top with it as well, and switching to ride in places, and bongos. I think there's bongos going all through it. I think. So it's kind of obscured, you know, purposely, and then it's mixed so you can't tell what it is. And that's the idea, you know.
Probably hence why everybody's fighting over what it really is.
Yeah.
Although in that break, in the break section, it does sound like a funky drummer in that section because it just sounds like it's been sped up.
Uh-huh.
But
I don't know.
You know,
I can't remember. But it was all done on, you know, S1000,
the Akai.
The Akai, yeah, S1000, and primitive. You know, what year is it? It's it's actually 1989, and cube bass, John Cornfield on cube bass, and that was it really. And then it put down to 2-inch tape, to 24 track, and extended. So as we worked on the extended version at the end, we kept having to add so many bars, or I don't think we even counted bars. We counted minutes and seconds. According, you know, there was no bar count as such. There might have been on the cube bass, but I didn't couldn't quite fathom all that cube-based stuff. It was another department for me.
Now, with the Lars, I don't know how much we covered on the Lars, because that's kind of an interesting story, because, of course, you know, it went through a lot of iterations, because there was the original producer that, and they'd already put out a version, hadn't they, of There She Goes. And then I think Steve Lillywhite remixed it, added some things.
Yeah,
they hadn't put it out?
I don't think they put out a version. There's only one official version of There She Goes.
Okay.
You know, when it came out as the single. But yes, he tried different producers. I think what happened is that Lee recorded some demos on a cassette with flat batteries in his kitchen, and it sounded fantastic. And that's what he wanted it to sound like. The night he played that cassette back, that's what he wanted to experience when he heard the recording in the studio, you know. And of course, he wasn't getting it because it was all different, you know. It was 2 or 3 years later for a start, and you know, the difference between recording on a dictaphone in your kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning, recording in a studio. Anyway, yes. So I had attempts at 4 or 5 tracks. I think I did. Man, We're Only Human, Feeling, Come In, Come Out. And There She Goes was kind of at the end, really. I mean, you know, there's this other song called There She Goes. Can we have a go? You know, can we do that one? It's a new one or something. So that was not the prime song when we were working, kind of thing. This tape that Lee had recorded in the kitchen, no one had a copy of it. It's like, Lee, why didn't you bring this tape in that you swear by so that we can hear it and compare it with what we're doing? I haven't got one. I've lost it. It's like, so it was all in his head. But it was fantastic, and they were fantastic. There was a real vibe to them. You know, him and John Power, when particularly at the end of the session, it's horrible when you're struggling for getting tracks down, and at the end of the session, the 2 main singers sit in the back of the room and by the chair and just sing the song in perfect, you know, harmony and everything, and really get into it. And you know, they're kind of not even in the studio doing it. It's like, why can't you do that in the studio? But they were just temperamental, you know. He was never happy, really, and always changing musicians and changing things, and you know, wanting to explore different tempos, different keys, all that kind of thing, and confusing himself and confusing everyone else unnecessarily. But it's funny because I did it and Mike Hedges worked with them. Mike Hedges did a whole album on a TG mixer in France that he had. You know, Mike Hedges had a studio in Normandy, I think, and took the Lars out there. A guy called Bob Andrews, who's really good. I think he worked with Nick Lowe and maybe Elvis Costello, Stiff Records, those people. And he did an album with them, you know, 10, 12 tracks, and they scrapped it all. And then I come along, and then Lillywhite was the last one, I think. Oh, John Porter as well. You probably know John Porter.
Absolutely, yeah.
He was the first guy to work with them.
On the special edition here, the producers they've got mentioned are Mike Hedges, John Porter, Gavin McKillop.
Oh, yeah.
Then you, John Leckie, Bob Andrews, and Jeremy Allen.
Jeremy was an engineer, really. He used to look after the mobiles and things, Jeremy.
For engineers listed, there's twice as many as that.
I was so disappointed, though, because on the box set or whatever it was, or some B-side, they released a John Leckie version of There She Goes. And for a start, I have no recollection of it, but it's got a fade up, you know, the guitar intro at the beginning. Ding, 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 and I'm fading it up, you know, and there's no bass, and the harmonies are missing. You know, someone's found a rough mix, and we said, oh, what's it like if we fade up? Oh, I like the fade up, you know, and then tomorrow you hate it, you know.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and there's no bass on it, no bass guitar, and no harmony vocals, no backing vocals, you know. And they called it the John Leckie mix. Forever it's going to be there, and as if it's my doing. And it's work in progress, you know. I think that's what I submitted as the final thing.
I hear you. It's amazing how this stuff goes into history, doesn't it? As fact. Let's get stuck into the bends now. Tell me, how did you get the gig? Who gave you the phone call? What was the?
I don't know who gave me the phone call. It was a tape at the time. I had a management company, and the tape came through from Parlophone. Keith Rosencroft was the A&R person, and so I went up to heard the tape, thought, this was pretty good, kind of like the Pixies or something. I wasn't a big fan of the Pixies, but that was probably my first reaction back in whenever it was, 93. Didn't really like Pablo Honey, but went to see them at a gig. Went up to Gloucester and saw the gig, and sat in the coach with them talking, and it was great. It was like we instantly, what's the word, bonded, I suppose. There was a kind of mutual kind of respect for each other. I got the gig anyway, and they'd already booked 9 weeks at RAK Studios, RAK Studio 1, living in as well. Booked in for 9 weeks there, and was it okay if I could do it there? And of course, I'd worked there loads of times. So yeah, it's perfect for me. And they lived in the accommodation, the apartments upstairs, and for all that time. I don't think we worked weekends. We might have worked Saturdays. I think at that time I was doing this thing where I'd come in Saturday afternoon, finish at 6 o'clock on a Saturday, and then start again 6 o'clock Sunday night. So, just as you're getting bored kind of thing, you can come back in the studio on 6 o'clock Sunday night. So, although you have a day off, it's actually only, it's 24 hours off, really. Anyway, it seemed to work, and everyone loved it because you worked really hard on a Saturday afternoon because you were going home early, and you also came in Sunday night for playback. Really, everyone was a lot more relaxed, and whether you recorded something, it didn't matter because you could go through the week's work. So that's how we recorded it, really. And the band were great. The band were really well rehearsed. I think they had about 36 songs. I think in all I recorded 26 songs or something, more than what the album was. I did all the B-sides and everything. But the main thing was, from the record company point of view, getting a follow-up single to Creep, what they were really interested in. And whether the band had that or not, no one was prepared to say, not even the band or the record company or the manager. Well, the manager thought, they think everything was great, and pick any one and it could be a single, which is probably true. Anyway, we had this big meeting at the band's rehearsal room, and they played about 35 songs, and there was the A&R from America flew over, Capitol Records, the UK, the London office all came up to Oxford, and the manager, and we all sat in this rehearsal room, and the band were fantastic. They had everything together, and it was like a show. They were jumping around and everything was cranked up. And well, which one? We need a short list of 4 songs for the singles, from this album before you go in, And of course, no one could decide. There were 4 songs, and it was our priority to record them first and make them into number 1 hit singles, And then, of course, which they were desperate to release. And then, of course, they wanted B-sides. So at that time, whenever they released a single CD, there would be at least 2 B-sides, if not 3 or 4, because they would often release the single twice, but with different B-sides. So the fans would have to buy the same A-side to get the 2 B-sides, which were considered obscure, So yeah, there was an awful lot to record. And then when we finished, the last thing, of course, was to finish the album. So we had to do the A-sides, do the B-sides, then do the album. And of course, once we got stuck in, we didn't know what was what. This was much too good to be a B-side, This one isn't an A-side, So we kind of finally settled, I think, on the 4 songs. Planet Telex was written in the studio at the time. It was the only one that was not demoed or not rehearsed. We kind of made Planet Telex up in the studio late one night. It was crazy with some drum loops that Nigel had got together on the Sound Tools. It wasn't even called Pro Tools. It was called Sound Tools. And we looped some drum loops from Killer Cars. There was a B-side called Killer Cars, and we took 2 patterns from that and made the Planet Telex. And I think we were doing an overdub with the echo on the piano stab. So, when you stab the Wurlitzer, so ba 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 ba, I had this repeat delay going on, shimmery. Also turning up the feedback and EQing the feedback so it goes off, it spins off. We were doing that, messing around, and that became part of the track. It was quite magic the way it all happened, with Planet Telex, and everyone seemed to have a part, and yet the song was kind of being made up as it went along. And about 2:00 in the morning, I said to Tom, it's 2:00, Tom, I think you should get out there and do the vocal. And okay. And he goes out there and he just sang. What you hear on the record is what he sang, almost like first go, no drop-ins or no second take. And that's the opening track of the record, So I love that. I mean, it was so pleasing,
Amazing.
And to come in the next day and everyone loving it even more the next day was also good feeling. Yeah.
Incredible.
High and Dry was never on the list either. It was
really?
never on the list. I didn't record that. That's actually the first recording of that song done by the live sound guy, Jim Warren, at Courtyard Studios at the Manager Studio. And I think Phil just someone told me Phil had just got a new drum kit with this big bass drum, and it wasn't really tuned. There was no padding on it, and it was all resonant and everything. And they just came, and Tom had been working, hey, let's do this, and that was the recording, so High and Dry. It was never on the list, or Planet Telex.
Okay, so I'm reading the Planet Telex. So we had the whole thing down within a couple of hours. The original title was Planet Xerox.
That's right, yes. It was always called, on the tape box, it would be Planet Xerox. And they couldn't get clearance from the Xerox company, the copying company. Xerox didn't let them use it, so that's why it's called Telex for some reason.
Which is interesting, because like Xerox is like a euphemism for, for a facsimile, a complete copy.
Like
People
Hoover,
would say,
like Hoover, yeah.
Yeah, like Hoover, like Phillips. Like if I said to you, pass me the Phillips, you'd know I'd meant a cross-edge screwdriver. Yeah. It's, yeah, I would always say, can you Xerox it? So High and Dry, according to this, was a track that Tom had since the 80s. That he had done it with a band called the Headless Chickens while he was a student at Exeter University. It was dismissed as being too Rod Stewart, apparently.
Yeah, too Rod Stewart, yeah. Too good for this album. It's too good for this album.
I think you were telling us before about how he had been affected by hearing Jeff Buckley, and that had validated him into using his falsetto. And then, of course, High and Dry is famous for its, its falsetto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that's maybe a reason why it had been ignored as well? But apart from being too Rod Stewart, was it maybe because he didn't feel confident in his falsetto until he saw Jeff Buckley live?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's true. I don't know how much whether that Jeff Buckley influence was that strong, but yeah, I can imagine it. Yeah. That's all I can say. It wasn't until I got the copy of the record where I went, "Ooh, what's this? High and Dry."
Tell me a little bit about, of course, the absolute masterpiece, Fake Plastic Trees.
Well, that was always, what can I say? It was always considered a masterpiece. That was always too good for this record, and too much to even consider as a single. It was beyond being a single. It was in another realm to pop single. So it was, I guess, never on the list as a single. It happened, let me see, it would happen kind of halfway through, and halfway through the 9-week session. And we had Nice Dream, I think, which we had strings on. We had the strings coming in, which was really one of their friends, whose name I can't remember, a kind of student friend of Johnny's. And they wanted a cello player. They said, did I know a cello player? And I'd been working with this girl called Carolina Lavelle, who's really good, who's actually signed as a solo artist to Warner's or something, which I didn't know. And she was my go-to cello person, And well, of course, when she turned up, she's one of these flamboyant or orchestral girls with flowing hair and robes and always doing, with her cello kind of stuff.
Sounds quite lovely.
It was lovely, but
Yeah.
put her against Johnny's student violin player, and he was terrified,
Yeah.
And it's like, can't we get another violin and viola and have a proper quartet, and Johnny's like, no, I've got to work the parts out. I haven't got a quartet written, Anyway, this was happening on the Wednesday. And Tuesday afternoon, I said, Tom, we haven't even got a backing track. They're coming tomorrow. We need to get the backing track for Fake Plastic Trees. And Tom went out and sang it. He got really frustrated by I don't know, the song, or people not respecting the song enough or something. And it was like, all right, well, we'll do it another, it's not that important. It's not, we can always do it another time. No, he knew he was kind of on the line to do it. He just went out, and I think I gave him a click, and it was just him playing the song and the vocal to a click by himself in the studio. And I always remember, because I had a 60 on his guitar. I had a 67 acoustic guitar, a 67 and a 57, I think, just there. And as soon as he started playing, the 67 went noisy, just started hissing and crackling. And so luckily I had the 57. And that's what the guitar sound is. And it was a really resonant guitar. I don't know what make of acoustic guitar it was, but it was very loud. But it wasn't like a Martin. It wasn't kind of deep and rich. It was more kind of resonant. It sounded like it had too much reverb on already, But Tom plays it very gently. He's really sensitive with his playing and everything. Yeah, so I'm pretty certain that acoustic guitar and vocal is the soul of what we hear of Fake Plastic Trees. It's the starting point, and it's what everything's built around.
It's incredible.
And they came in and did the strings. But what we next did, of course, was the Hammond organ, which kind of took a day to do, with Johnny playing the little answer things, the little droney thing on the Hammond organ, with different drawbars and, just getting it just dead right and sitting just right. We didn't have a string quartet or a large string section. We used just one violin and the cello, and they kind of double tracked, and the violinist took things, and Caroline played to sound like a viola or something. But anyway, that was the strings, but it all kind of merged together. And can I tell you a little trick?
Please, of course.
Not a trick, but something that is true, that is when the mixes. So the mixes were done by Sean Slade Bordelais, yeah. They were the producers on Pablo Honey, on their first album, and unknown to me, and they were always sort of not put down, but they were always like, oh, we don't want those Sean and Paul here, that's what they would do. No reverb, for instance, no reverb. We don't want it to sound like Sean and Paul just putting reverb on everything. We don't want it to sound like Pablo Honey. We don't want reverb. And unknown to me, that they sent the tapes to them to mix. And of course, when they came back, there was reverb. And reverb was banned for me, but they put it on. Anyway, when the mix of, and the mixes were quite good. They were very bright. They weren't like what I expected. They were really sizzly, kind of bright, clean, They were good. They were good mixes. And interestingly enough, of course, all the mixes that they did, so they didn't mix Street Spirit, and I don't think they mixed Planet Telex, and they didn't mix High and Dry, and they didn't mix My Iron Lung, because I think I mixed that because it was coming out as the single. But they did all the tracks in between. And when they sent Fake Plastic Trees, there were no strings on it. And as soon as we put it on, hang on, is that the only mix they've given us? There's no strings. Where's the strings gone? And so we flew the strings in. We literally played the DAT. up two faders and got the strings off the multi-track and mixed it just in an analog mix of their DATs against our strings, and that's what you get with Fake Plastic Trees.
And that's the album version.
That's the album version I had to add the strings because you just couldn't hear them. And rather than get them to do it again, we just bashed it down like that. And no one knows, And of course, the interesting thing is everything that they mixed was copy tape, was second generation, because they never got the master multi-tracks. They got a 24-track copy, so it's great the way you can copy a multi-track and it still be sounding solid like that. It's like, imagine how it would have sounded if they used the first generation,
This was done at the Manor?
No, Fake Plastic Trees was actually done at RAK.
Because Ed said here that the first version was a bit too Guns N' Roses' November Rain. And then it says recording sessions resumed at the Manor in July 94.
Yeah, but we didn't do Fake Plastic Trees.
Ah, interesting.
We went to the Manor after there was a few songs, The Bends and Bulletproof and a couple of others, which we didn't, which we weren't happy with. And the band wanted to go off, and My Iron Lung actually as well. And the band wanted to go off, and they were doing one of these tours to the Far East. They were playing like Bangkok and I don't know, Shanghai and Peking. They went off and of course tried out the new songs on that audience and came back, and they were like, much better, we're full of it now, we're going to really do it now and go to the Manor and do that. And they didn't really want to go to the Manor because it was Oxford, you see, and they felt, even though it's 20 miles from Oxford City, it's like they didn't want to be seen like endorsing Oxford or something. Or because it was close by, they didn't think it was, substance enough for them. But maybe, it was great anyway. We were just there for 2 weeks. And by myself, I just cut the rest of the record, recorded the bends and as I say, the Bulletproof and many of the others.
So the My Iron Lung story, is that's when you're at the Manor, yes?
Correct.
So you pull it up. I see.
We go to the Manor, and we've got with the intention of re-recording My Iron Lung, and we watch it. So they just done an MTV Astoria gig, an MTV show, which they had the tape of, and so we settled down one evening to watch this. And immediately My Iron Lung came on. They knew that the chorus was just much better than what we recorded at RAK. And so instead of re-recording the whole thing, because I don't know why, but we struggled over it. We used the verses from our version from RAK, and the chorus we managed to get the multi-track tape from MTV, and I guess they owned it, I think, and edited it in. Did a multi-track edit, and it all worked. I think I might have copied their tape and set some levels to make the edit work on the multi-track. And so that's it. It's like it opens up with the RAK version, and then when it hits the the chorus kind of part, that kind of rundown, it edits into Live at the Astoria, and then back to RAK for the verse and another chorus kind of thing. I'm trying to remember all this. It's a long time ago.
That's amazing. But
we had, amazing. We had a great time. I mean, making it. It was always kind of good vibes. It was always like for the music, really. I mean, we were always, whatever our personal things were going on, it was always about the the music and the song that we were working on.
I think, speaking as a musician of that period and being in bands, there was just a couple of records that really, at least in the UK, I do remember, it's like Modern Life is Rubbish by Blur had come out a year or two before, and it had just had, Graham was using pedals, pedals was the thing. And then this comes out and just sort of, just takes it to the new level, because it was like, yes, great guitar playing, great parts, but it was the sonic landscape of just listening to records that was really interesting. And it wasn't just all about, shredding and technique.
No.
It was like sonic landscapes, beautiful. Going back to what we love about great music,
But we did spend a lot of time on it. It wasn't really, and of course, it kind of came back to being the natural sound of the band. I remember when we started, and Tom said, "The first thing we've got to do is find a great guitar sound for Johnny." Okay, right, we can do that. So we rented in all these different amplifiers and guitars, and and after a few days, Johnny's just standing there with his Telecaster and his Fender Twin and blues breaker pedal, and there's like, what's wrong with this?
Right.
So the whole record is really done on his on his setup. And even though we went through, I don't know, Marshall Soldanos and Ampegs and all sorts of Mesa Boogies, but ended up just with his Fender Twin and that Telecaster that you've probably seen. He still plays, I think, or I don't know. He was always, every time I saw him on stage, he had that telly.
I worked with this band. The guitar player ended up joining My Morning Jacket, and he not Jim James, and he said to me,
his name's Carl.
Carl Brummel, and he said to me, "Who's the one producer you would work with above everybody else?" And I said, "John Leckie."
Really?
And that would have been in 2003, 2004.
Really?
Yeah, I said the same thing to James Valentine as well, from Maroon 5, and he told me that you turned them down.
I'm sorry, yeah. It was ages ago, yeah, I remember.
And the Fray asked me, who would you have produce? And I said John Leckie, and apparently you turned them down as well. And I remember seeing Safter, maybe 10 years ago at Epic, and I bumped in, I don't know who he was talking to at Epic, probably a record there, and I was joking with him, and I was like, look, I'll come and make John's tea for him. I don't have to be the engineer. I'll just make the tea just to be in on the session. And I joked with him, and I was like, what's with all this freaking turning down all the bands I keep telling him to go?
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. I think it's part of the mystique, isn't it? That, that this famous, English producer, you have to be just right. You can't just be a massively successful band like those two bands. You've got to have an album that he wants to work on. So I thought that was... I think that adds to the mystique.
I don't know if I told you, I was always getting offers from Korn, right?
Oh,
the band Korn, with a K.
Yes, yeah.
I think they asked me for about 3 albums. They kept contacting, and Safter would say, we got Korn on the phone again. They want to know, we want you to go out to LA next week and meet them. And I actually did. I actually took them up on their weekend offer in Hollywood. But no, I never worked with them.
You told me the story. You told me the story last time. You said that they didn't know which Pink Floyd record you'd worked on, and they asked you about Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, they asked me. No, they asked me how much acid I took when I produced Dark Side of the Moon.
They flew you over to ask you a question about a record you didn't work on.
Yeah, that's right. But it was crazy, really, because I just sat around in the hotel Malmaison or the Standard or something for 2 or 3 days. Really, I arrived on the Wednesday evening and was going back on the Monday, and I didn't get to see them until Saturday afternoon. And that was it. It was like literally a 15-minute meeting. Whereas what I should have, if I was the manager and I'd paying all my flight, my first class Virgin flight and everything, straight from the airport, straight to the rehearsal room.
I'm not sure if we have that world anymore, do we?
It's bizarre. No, it's true. It's bizarre when I look at budgets and things. I've just done, they've just released a box set of Be-Bop Deluxe, Drastic Plastic.
Fantastic.
What a fantastic Drastic Plastic. That's right. And we recorded that in 1977. So we'd done 1, 2. This was the 3rd record I'd done with them. And we recorded it in the south of France. I mean, literally, because someone in the band, the drummer or something, said, "I'm really bored with Abbey Road. Can't we go somewhere really good like the south of France, like the Stones go?" I said, "Sure, I'll phone the Stones office, book the Stones mobile." And we were 2 months, 8 weeks down in Juan-les-Pins in this big house. And we made the record there in 8 weeks, and had lots of people, had wives and girlfriends stay in, and did I don't know 25 songs or something, double album, which we weren't meant to do, of course. And then when we came back, and I remember the manager flew over, and said, "So tell me, Bill." He asked Bill, he said, "Bill, how long do you think it's going to take to finish this album?" And Bill says, "Oh, I think we need another 6 weeks at the Manor, and then maybe a few weeks mixing at Abbey Road." And that's what we did. I mean, the budget was just like humongous budget. But no one ever mentioned it. No one ever kind of said no, or don't you think, instead of going for 6 weeks, don't you can do 5 or something?
What an absolutely fantastic band. Do you still talk to those guys?
Yeah. Well, only Bill, really.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to all the rest of them. Yeah, Bill still makes records. Bill Nelson. He's he's always made records in his bedroom, in his house kind of thing. He's never had a proper, mega studio. He's never had a studio where he's employed staff. It's always been, plug it in and sort it out himself kind of thing. And he worked on a Mackie for many years. I don't know when Mackie Digital, all in one hard drive, I don't know, with mixer fader kind of thing. He must have worked on that for 20 years or so. I think he had 2 of them. One broke down. He managed to get another one. And then Mackie stopped making them and stopped repairing them. So he's just taken up Cubase. Can you believe? Nuendo, is it, or is it now Nuendo or still Cubase? I think it's still Cubase.
I think they both exist in tandem. Yeah, there's a Nuendo and a Cubase.
Oh God! But anyway, Bill's learning Cubase, and of course he's never touched the audio software before. He's only used the Mackie. I mean, he can make videos. He can use Final. He's pretty good at the computer and everything. But I just know he doesn't like all the messing around with a work surface, and without a work surface, I mean, without proper faders. And he's tried the different faders, MIDI faders and things, but and he keeps making records. He makes 5, 6, 7, 8 albums a year and sells them to all his fans, and
Amazing.
Does really well.
We did talk a little bit about Roy Harper, I think, in that first one. You did that with what, Peter Jenner?
Peter Jenner, yes.
Yeah, HQ I'm thinking of in particular, of course. It's kind of a double whammy. If you look behind me, I don't know if you can see it in your view, but there is a England Test cap up there, and I got a Ben Stokes book, and there's a bunch of cricket balls up in over the corner.
Oh, great!
I'm a huge cricket fan, so
right,
of course, being a Roy Harper fan, and then of course, when an old cricketer leaves the crease is
that's right, because it was different. Because in England it was called HQ, headquarters, man. Was the idea. And on the front cover is a picture of Roy walking on the sea. It's this terrible, not Photoshop, but collage of Roy walking on the ocean.
He's like jogging on it or something, I think.
Jogging on the sea. It's really horrible. And that was with EMI, and then it got released, and Chrysalis actually brought it out. Chrysalis in USA fixed up a tour and were really keen to do it. And I think they called the whole record When an Old Cricketer Leaves the Crease, which was the key song, on that record. I think the cover was great because it had the rules of cricket, and it was really nice photography with the leather and the bat and the grass and the green and the crease, and and of course no one in America knew what he was talking about, because it was very detailed in naming famous cricketers, wasn't it? And it could be James and it could be John.
I know. He's on the front cover. He's like half dressed, because he's shirtless.
Oh yeah, and he's walking off. Yes, that's actually Yeah, that picture. Yeah, that picture's from a Pink Floyd cricket match. You know, Pink Floyd are really into sport of all kind. Really,
Yeah, yeah.
football team. There's a Pink Floyd football team and a Pink Floyd cricket team. Probably a Pink Floyd snooker team as well. But no, they did have a cricket team, and Roy would challenge them. So Roy would, or EMI. It was a Pink Floyd against EMI, and I think Roy, wouldn't play for EMI. And the Floyd had all professional cricketers. I think that half of their team were like professionals. They play for England.
I was about to say, I'm sure those guys could call anybody and they would show up to be part of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I imagine the Roy Harper thing was probably them, probably the US, trying to build off of the Pink Floyd Association, obviously, with Have a Cigar and all of that stuff.
That's right. But they had a touring band, they toured the States and everything. It was chaos. It was just like, I don't know who they supported or I can't remember the story now. I'm sure Roy's got it written somewhere. But he hasn't actually done his book. He keeps threatening with his memoirs, Roy does. He's very good. He's in Uncut magazine this week, and Mojo actually giving a little thing, just, how you doing, Roy? Coming on, getting the new record together. I think it's because he's 80 years old. Can you believe he's 80?
And then it was Born in Captivity, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah. We're into Roy Harper obscurities now. Roy Harper trivia. Born in Captivity was actually, I recorded most of that record on a Revox, actually. And we copied the Revox to an 8-track. So Roy said, I've got these songs. So I went up to his house with my Revox and just recorded them. And of course, recorded them not two separate tracks, guitar and vocal, but as a kind of together. I don't know. I just recorded it to hear it, And then we ended up, this is really good. Let's bounce, copy it onto the 8-track and put some more stuff on. And that was Born in Captivity, or put more vocals with Roy. It's always back choirs. It's always backing vocals, harmonies.
Beautiful. And more sporting references, because of course Stan is about Stanley Matthews.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I'm glad I saw Stanley.
Yeah.
I'm glad I saw Stanley. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a more quintessentially English artist than Roy Harper in many ways. He's
probably right. Yeah.
And then, of course, I don't know if you worked on it, but Whatever Happened to Jugular, which of course has the Rizzler paper cover on it, which is when you're a kid, and we're all, let's just say discovering certain rollable substances. That has got to have, that cover must have been designed specifically for the joke of people rolling their joints on the album cover.
Of course, that's what they sold it for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I was out of touch with Roy at that time. Back to the Jugular, and didn't he do one called Looney on the Bus?
Looney on the Bus.
We can't go through Roy Harper's obscure albums.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it will spark off some interest for some people. Looney on the Bus. It was Descendants of Smith was afterwards. And then Looney on the Bus, looks like it was at the same time, pretty much. 15th studio album in 88.
Oh, there we go.
Wow, he's prolific.
But the best of all is Stormcock, of course, which you probably know. Stormcock is, the first one that I worked on as a tape op. I didn't really engineer. I came in on Life Mask. But Stormcock is just 4 songs. It's got Same Old Rock and One Man Rock and Roll Band, and Me and My Woman is the key track on there, is the lengthy track, Me and My Woman. And it's fantastic. It's just Roy on his own with, as I say, lots of vocals and harmonies and crazy things, guitars through Leslie's and things. Jimmy Page plays the solo on Same Old Rock. He plays with him. But I was tape op on that, and I was there for the string overdub. So Me and My Woman is a 20-minute, 25-minute piece going through lots of different shades, lots of different sections and things, with an orchestra arranged and written by someone called David Bedford, who worked with Kevin Ayers and lots of other people as an arranger and played keyboards. And this was a 20-minute piece that David had scored, not for a quartet. I don't know how many strings there were there, really, maybe 16 or something. It's down in Studio 2. I just started. This is 1970. I'd been there like a month, 2 months.
Amazing.
And I was booked in to do these strings at 7:00. And it was all a bit chaotic. And Pete Bound said, "Oh, can you get the tapes out? You know, what are we doing, Roy? And we've got the strings. What title are we doing? Get the tapes out of the library." And of course, they hadn't been edited. So Roy hadn't chosen. He just recorded the middle section the night before and done 4 or 5 takes of it, but hadn't edited it into the 8-track to record the strings over the top, if you see what I mean. So the multi-track hadn't been edited. And the string players were sitting there waiting to play with the conductor. And no one had told me or Pete Bound that it had to be edited. They just assumed that it had been done, you know. I didn't know, and they were telling me off. And it's like, I've never been here, you know. I've only been here a week working here. Nothing to do with me. Anyway, so I learnt my 8-track 1-inch tape editing very quickly with a 16-piece orchestra sitting there waiting, you know. And I can remember one of my first meetings with Roy was this panic to edit the tape, and Roy telling me what tape to use and wanting to hear it again and again, and the orchestra going into overtime. You know, the orchestra are getting paid once you go over the 3 hours. You know, they're into overtime.
That's incredible.
So that was
incredible.
Yeah.
I'd love to do something on Muse to move us up to the 21st century.
I haven't heard it yet. They haven't sent me one. But I see with Muse, they've just dug out Origin of Symmetry and found all the overdubs that they never used, because I never mixed that. I can't remember what happened. I was never actually commissioned to mix it because they wanted to mix it themselves at the Sawmills, because the Muse come from the Sawmills, you see. That's where they lived close by, and their first studio experience was being allowed the Sawmills for weekends. That's where we found them, really. And they wanted to mix it themselves at the Sawmills, Origin of Symmetry. So I just did all the recording. I didn't do all the record. It was Dave Bottrell did Plug-in Baby and Newborn, I think. He did 2 tracks, which were all MIDI with drum machines and stuff. And then I did the kind of live stuff, or the bizarre stuff, or the songs that weren't written yet that they bluffed their way through. Anyway, they've just re-released the record, and it's called Origin of Symmetry Revisited. It's an album. They found the orchestra, yes, that we recorded, even the photographs that I took of the band with the orchestra.
Wow.
And they weren't used on the record, and loads of guitar overdubs and bits and pieces, you know.
That's amazing.
Because John Cornfield mixed it at the Sawmills, and he was moaning at me saying, "Oh, bloody hell, you got to stop him," because he's real Cornish, you know. "Bloody hell, you got to stop him wanting to put everything through the big muff. Everything. They want to do the mix and then put the fucking mix through the big muff."
Do we do much on Kula Shaker? I can't remember if we talked much about that either. The first record's a masterpiece. I mean, it was
million seller, multi-million seller.
Yeah, total masterpiece. Yeah, I mean, I love the first record.
I think we might have talked about it because I think I told the story of how I did the first record, and we did 4 tracks at a time. We recorded 4 tracks, mixed them, and then came back and did another 4 tracks, often at another studio, and mixed them until we had the 12 tracks done. And it took, how long did it take? It took a month, 5 weeks or something. You know, not a big amount of time. In fact, it was done fairly quickly. And it sold 2-3 million. And then the second album was done by Bob Ezrin, recorded on Dave Gilmour's boat, Dave Gilmour's studio on the boat, Astoria. And it took a year, and it sold about 20,000. I wouldn't say they were Krishna devotees, or they I think Crispian was brought up as with Hare Krishna people, but he's not a real devotee. But he will have his little book with him, you know. And a good section of the songs mention the whole Krishna Vedantic, the stories, and those songs. A lot of the songs are traditional, and he would use them around riffs and lyrics and things. And he's also the only person that's co-wrote a song with George Harrison.
Oh wow!
Because there's a little, I don't know if you know, I don't know what's it called. I'd have to look it up what it's called. But there's a little riff. I don't know if you know Wonderwall music. Wonderwall music by George Harrison.
Yeah, I do.
It's a film soundtrack. A lot of it. George went to India and did lots of Indian different instruments, really, to introduce everyone to the Chennai and the sarod and things. And he also recorded a band with Tony Ashton and Eric Clapton, and there's a riff there that's a tape loop. Go, and that's the loop, the tape loop. Anyway, Crispin wrote a song to it, a Krishna song, and sent it to George Harrison, and it's on the Bob Ezrin record. And sent it to George Harrison, explained that he was a Krishna devotee, and he meant well, and he wasn't just anybody, And George said, "Okay." So Crispin Mills is the only person that's got a co-write with George Harrison.
So you were born in Paddington. Did we talk about this before? And where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Paddington?
Yeah. Why, do you know Paddington?
I mean,
W10, West London.
I mean, central but west. Yeah, west.
Yeah, it's Maida Vale. It's just a bit. It's about 4 miles south of Abbey Road Studios of St John's Wood. I went to school in St John's Wood, but yeah, Paddington is W10, and Notting Hill Gate, Holland Park is W11. And we're Paddington Station. But it was great because, I mean, basically, when you're a teenager in London, you can walk everywhere, really. I mean, I do it often. You get the train or something. In those days, you never got the buses and trains stopped at 11. The pubs closed at 11, and you usually find yourself walking home across London from Peckham for 2 hours home to walk home and things. Yeah, so I was always a Londoner. I brought up and lived my life in all that time. All those teenage years was all around there in the 60s.
What did your mum and dad do?
My mum and dad,
Yeah,
they didn't do anything important. My dad had a butcher, was a butcher. He didn't have a butcher's shop, but he worked as a manager of a butcher. And my mum just worked in shops, cleaning shops, and toy shops and general, that was it. It's a whole different, it was bleak in England in the before the Beatles,
right.
It was a bleak, I was the only one that, well, I didn't go to university, but they certainly, my mum and dad didn't really have an education like I had, We were really lucky and privileged to have all that, and be, being able to have great education. I had a really good school time, really, with different things. I got A levels. I got A level physics, A level geography. I got about study 8 or 9 O levels. O level Latin and French and crazy things, chemistry. But I was never any good at maths. I was useless. If I'd got A level maths, I probably would have gone to university and been an atomic physicist or something, because I was really into physics and that kind of thing. But then the lure of rock and roll came and took it all away, And then the 60s happened, and then, Jimi Hendrix turned up and the light show went on, and there we go.
That's incredible. Had you already seen Pink Floyd playing live before you worked with them?
Yeah. I saw them in London Free School in 1966, I think, when they were making Piper at the Gates of Dawn, or even before that, when that Arnold Lane, I think, had just come out. And the London Free School was was a village, a church hall, really. It's not the crypt. It's in Powis Square. There's a church near Portobello Road in Notting Hill Gate. They had shows there, and someone said, "Hey, that Pink Floyd that just done Arnold Lane, they're playing. Should we go and see them?" And so that's when I first saw them with the light show, with the San Francisco light show. It was fantastic. It was organised by International Times, which is a bit like a Village Voice in New York, I suppose. The International Times. It was the underground newspaper, like John Hopkins, and also Peter Jenner. He was a big part of the International Free School, which, because it was a kind of council-run school, I'm not quite certain how it all worked. It's how Pete Jenner managed to get the concerts in Hyde Park, because Peter Jenner and Black Hill were put in every Saturday, would put those concerts on through the summer of, I think the first was in 67, 68, 69 was the Stones, and onwards and there was no facilities. I mean, there was no toilets, there was no food or anything. It was just like, oh, free concert, set the stage up and 200,000 people turn up, and there's just a few policemen. No, it's true. There was never any facility or toilets or electricity or, nothing really. It was just like, well, just start playing the music and see who comes. Stones concert was like that and everything. It was really cool, actually, the whole thing. Blind Faith. Every Saturday afternoon we were in Hyde Park seeing different people, traffic,
So working on Meddle as your first proper engineering credit, I mean, that must have been a little nerve-wracking, to say the least, because you know the band, you like the band, and there you are, fresh off the boat, as it were, engineering.
Well, yeah, that's what I did. That's what happened, I mean, the band were good. It wasn't like the band, the band knew what was going on. They wouldn't touch the equipment. It's very funny, actually, because I was talking to someone else about that, about Phil Spector, I think we might have been talking about, and how they were surprised that Phil Spector never touched the desk. And I'm like, well, no, they didn't, and Paul McCartney, and all these people, they wouldn't actually touch the knobs or the faders. They'd tell you to touch it, like a bit more, oh, too much or something. But they wouldn't actually do it themselves. They wouldn't go and fiddle with the EQ or the graphic or something. You'd have to do it and get the okay. Is that good?